Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball. Let me wish all of you a belated but sincere Happy New Year 2022. I'm Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. For my first theme of the new year, I've chosen to take a look at the Middle East because currently there is a widespread perception that the United States, for so long the provider of security and the organizing power in structuring political relationships in the region, that the United States is disengaging. Now, of course, this perception has been fed by the chaotic withdrawal of the US and its NATO allies from Afghanistan last August, but also by the fact that the US has drawn down its forces significantly in Iraq. It's subcontracted the ongoing fight against ISIS to local Kurdish forces in both Syria and Iraq. It hasn't really played much of a role in trying to sort out the economic meltdown of Lebanon, leaving that job to President Macron of France or to the EU or to the International Monetary Fund. It's loosened its ties to Saudi Arabia, long one of America's closest allies in the region, by halting the provision of lethal military supplies to Riyadh, which could be used in Yemen, of course. And finally, unlike its predecessors, the Biden administration so far hasn't come up with any new Middle East peace initiative to bring Israelis and Palestinians together. In fact, what is symbolic is that 1 year into the new administration, there is still no American ambassador in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, or Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, one should not exaggerate the theme of US disengagement. The United States, of course, still has important military bases in the region, the Navy in Bahrain and the Air Force in Qatar, for instance. It's still the American Navy still patrols the Straits of Hormuz to keep that vital waterway open. And finally, Biden is very much focusing on one Middle Eastern issue, which is the Iranian nuclear deal, with negotiations in Vienna to try to revive that agreement. But nonetheless, if there is a difference, it seems that Biden is determined not to allow himself to be diverted from his foreign policy priorities, containing China, but also Russia, currently in Eastern Europe, by recurrent Middle Eastern crises cropping up. This happened, for example, to the Clinton administration, which became obsessed with implementing the Oslo Accords and searching for reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis. It happened big time to George W. Bush, of course, with the war on terror after 9/11 and the disastrous invasion of Iraq. It happened to Obama, who was diverted from his domestic policies by the surge in Afghanistan. And it was also true of Trump, who became obsessed also with Iran and supporting the petro monarchies in the Gulf. Now, the declining profile and visibility of the United States is, of course, allowing other major powers to fill the vacuum. It's, of course, well known what Russia is doing in Syria, but also in Libya, and its search for port facilities in Sudan, its rapprochement with Egypt. We see China moving in as the largest purchaser of Middle Eastern hydrocarbons. We see Turkey, of course, intervening also in northern Syria and Iraq, and Iran spreading its wings right across the region. But what is most interesting here is the impact that this moving chessboard with more parts and less predictability is having on the locals, the Arab states and Turkey in the region itself. We've seen some very surprising developments over the last couple of months. For example, the UAE, which once excoriated the Assad regime in Syria, has reopened its embassy in Damascus. The UAE and Saudi Arabia have both held talks with Iran. President Erdogan of Turkey has been in Egypt and the UAE to mend fences with countries that he once strongly criticized. And Erdogan has even mentioned that he wants to visit Saudi Arabia in February as well. Qatar, which was long the outcast of the Gulf Cooperation Council because of its perceived support for the Muslim Brotherhood, has now been allowed back into the fold. Mohammed bin Salman, the controversial controversial Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has been on an image mending tour of the region after being isolated because of his alleged involvement in the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul back in 2018. Everywhere we look, feuds are being laid to rest and people are making nice to each other. Now, on the surface, this may look quite positive, but how far is it really going? Is this about more than simply making provision against uncertainty, hedging your bets, trying to improve your image, simply tactical maneuverings? Will this bring about any greater stability long-term in the Middle East? Well, the signs are not very positive in that respect so far. There is a downside to this in the sense that the absence of the United States has been used, for example, by the president of Tunisia, Kais Saied, to crack down on the political Islamist Ennahda party and seize power in Tunisia, or it's being used by the military dictatorship in Sudan to eliminate the civilian forces from the government. The Prime Minister Hamdok, civilian Prime Minister, resigned in Sudan just last week. Secondly, when you look at all of the big problems of the region, they are as far from resolution as ever, whether you think of Syria or you think of the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, whether you think of the ongoing agony of Yemen, whether you think of the political stalemate in Libya, where the December elections have been postponed, the economic meltdown of Lebanon, I mentioned already, and of course, the freeze in the Arab-Israeli Palestinian issue, with the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas now in power 4 years after it was due to hold an election. So some Western observers may be experiencing a sense of schadenfreude when they see that now the Arab states can no longer blame the United States, but have to take responsibility for their own affairs. But the lesson for me of all of this is that the non-Western Middle East isn't really looking in any better shape than the old Western Middle East. There is no alternative but for the United States and the European Union to be engaged in the region and try to sort out the problems as best they can. This is frustrating because the conflicts are intractable. The local actors are often very, very ungrateful. But I think they've shown so far that they are also not very able to transform crisis management into conflict resolution, short-term tactical issues into a long-term vision for the future integration of the region. In Godfather 2, the well-known movie of Francis Ford Coppola, the character played by Al Pacino says that every time he tries to leave the mafia, it grabs him by the arm and pulls it back in. This, I think, is the fate of the United States and the European Union in the Middle East as well. So better to engage constructively, and I'll have more to say on how this can be done regarding the particular issues and crises in future editions of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball. But that's enough for today. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and of course look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.